Here's a quote that I love. He who has mastered others is powerful, but he who has mastered himself is mightier still. Life is a conversation. We are all in conversation with ourselves every day, every minute of every day, asking questions like, what does this mean to me? Will I do this? How am I feeling? What am I feeling? Am I loved? It's this chatter going on consistently in our head that I spoke about earlier that prevents us from communicating effectively with others. By understanding this and know that it's happening not only with you, but with your clients, workmates, partners, children, etc., you can make a huge difference in how effective you are with your communication. We need to understand it's there. We need to acknowledge it. We need to quiet it down and be able to listen to the other person's words. This can be a bit of a challenge at first because there is so much information going on in your mind all the time. It will take a bit of focus and concentration at first, but eventually you'll be able to tune it out and become a better listener and therefore a much better communicator. The questions we ask of ourselves and of the world influence how we communicate with everyone in our lives, relationships and work. So why do we communicate? Start by writing down why you communicate. I'm going to give you an example here. I communicate to make a difference in people's lives. So can you think of some and write them down for me now, why you communicate? Now that you've done that, you may be interested to find out that no matter what you've written down, the answer to the above question, we all communicate to feel good. That's it. Try it. Think of what you wrote above and then ask one question. Why? When you answer it, ask it again. Why? And keep asking why. And when you get to the bottom of it all, your answer will be to feel good. You see, all buying, selling, and communication is emotional. We are all governed by our emotions at the time. By having a clear understanding that no matter what the other person's communication is, that person wants to feel good and so do you. I'll expand on my example here for you. I said that I communicate to make a difference in people's lives. Why? Because I have knowledge that can help them. Why? Because they can change their life with it. Why? So they learn and grow. Why? Because I love helping people. It's what I do. Why? It makes me feel good. So you see, this example extends to someone yelling at you as well. The other person is venting their frustration, not in a good way, so that they feel better. And I love this quote from Anthony Robbins. The quality of your life is the quality of your communication. And as I said earlier, we're going to talk about now active listening. Moving on to active listening. Now I know it sounds backwards again, but active listening is simple and it's an outstanding way of paying attention to another person's conversation that will encourage them to continue speaking. This in turn will help you truly understand what they are saying and respond accordingly and appropriately to them. The thing to remember here is we always filter and therefore interpret any conversation through our own experiences, our knowledge, our understandings of the world, our interests, and a biggie is our beliefs. Studies have been done in this area and they conclude that we hear half of what is said, we listen to half of that, and we remember half of that. In other words, we tend to hear what we want to hear and we see what we want to see. This is why learning this simple art of active listening is so important. Instead of assuming your interpretation of the conversation is correct and that your response is appropriate, you will know exactly how to respond and know you are always appropriate. This is the key to becoming a better communicator. Active listening ensures you understand what the other person is saying and prevents any misunderstandings. If you don't listen actively, you may tend to only hear part of what the person is saying. You may hear information incorrectly or assume you know what they're going to say and interrupt them. Have you ever had a conversation with someone like that, who constantly interrupts you? Because they assume they know what you're going to say. For this reason, my advice always is listen to the full stop. I want you to say that statement. I want you to say it again and let it really sink in, as this is the best advice that you'll ever get on how to be a better communicator. Since learning this magic tool, I have been in conversations where I literally say nothing except, "Tell me more. That's interesting," and things like that, and had the comment at the end, "You're great to talk to, Lyn." The reason is most people today don't get a chance to talk about themselves. And as a trainer, salesperson, and anyone in the service industry, you will find people want to talk. So don't cut them off thinking you know what they are going to say. Now, it took me a while to learn this skill, as I believe I know how to help everyone. I still do. So what I did was I'd sit with my hands in my lap when talking to the new client, and I'd just dig my nails ever so slightly into my hand as a constant reminder to listen, and then listen some more. Then ask more questions so I could listen some more. I know this may sound a little bit bizarre, but it worked for me, and you have to find out what will work for you. So you let the person know you're listening. When speaking face to face, anyone can see whether they have been understood by the way you respond. For example, with a nod or a smile. These we refer to as verbal nods. You need to ask relevant questions when appropriate to show you understand what they're talking about. Because our next subject is questions really are the answer. This is the next thing we need to understand for our communication skills. This is a powerful message. There have been many books written to help people understand how to engage another person in conversation. The key ingredient is truly wanting to listen, and not just listening with your own end in mind. The way to achieve this is to ask great questions, which brings me to closed versus open questions. Now, I know we've done work on this before, most of us. When we consistently ask closed questions, we don't allow the other person to really have their say. A closed question is a question that ends in yes or no. So closed questions have a place to gain valuable information and get people to disclose specific facts about themselves. And while they have their place, if you continue down this rocky road of dead ends, you'll hit a barricade and the conversation will stop. If you follow a few closed questions with an open one, the result can be magical. Let's say, once you found out that someone has moved to this area recently, you can ask, So why did you happen to move here? This will tend to gain even more disclosure from the person. After finding out a person wasn't happy with the last experience they had, one question I always asked is, tell me about your experience. By asking this, I found out what they didn't like, and then I'd ask some more open questions to start finding out what they do like. So here we're going to give you some very good conversation extenders, and these are, tell me more, or tell me more about. Why? You can add, if appropriate, why do you say that? How? How do you see yourself after 5 months of training? In what way is another good one. There's what, and what sort of sits in the middle of open and closed. Some closed-ended questions always start with do you, are you, who, where, when, and which. Here is a conversation I had recently with a new client who was unhappy with her health and her body shape. I asked her some questions and she started talking about her work life, so I followed with, why did you choose to become a social worker? And what did you have to do to become a counsellor? After a while, I then said, tell me more about that. And she started to realise for herself why she was unhappy at work and that she had a problem communicating her needs to her manager. Her work life suffered, and because she felt trapped in a job she was now unhappy in, so did her home life, her body and her health. Once she realised she needed to address her work life, she was able to focus on actualising her goals and getting better results in what she wanted to achieve for herself. Now, I know people tend to be either easier or harder to get information from. I've had a fair few through my career. Some may be less inclined to disclose information to you, so you need to become that better listener and learn the art of asking great questions. Now, we have some common mistakes here that we can make if you're not careful in the beginning. The worst one is don't be too open in your open-enders. If your questions become too broad, it will become frustrating for the other person. And then we get back to cliches like, have you ever been approached by someone you may not have seen for a while, and the first thing they ask is, what have you been up to lately? How does that make you feel? Or, what's new? Even worse is when you first meet someone and they say, oh, so tell me about yourself. Which can be good depending on the situation, but they are hard questions to answer. These commonly used cliches are far too broad and make it very difficult to get any sort of conversation going. If I'm in general conversation with someone, I like to ask, what's the most interesting thing that happened to you this week? Even if they don't have an answer to start with, it's a good way to get a conversation started because it's an interesting question from the onset. Now, you may need to work on some open questions that suit you, and you can list them for future reference. To put this into context when you're working with people, the more disclosure you can get from someone, the easier it is to find out what their needs are. And when you better understand their needs, you will be able to show them how your product, service, will fill those needs. Or, in a more personal situation, you'll be able to understand your partner's needs better. Things to remember about sales. And trust me, whatever you do, you're selling something. And when it comes to selling, we all sell. We all buy. We're all driven by emotion. We're all driven by money and saving money. And we're all ready to buy the moment we come into any store or any club. We all have needs to fill, and someone is going to fill those needs. Communication is a loop. What you do influences the other person, and what they do influences you. It cannot be otherwise. You can only take responsibility for your part in the loop. You already influence others. The only choice is whether to be conscious or unconscious of the effects that you create. Now you may be asking, Lyn, what do you mean effects? Every time we're in conversation with another person, we are influencing them in some way. Sometimes small, other times in a big way. And they are influencing us. This is true of every conversation we have. I believe it's just that today we talk to so many people each day, it gets harder to see the way influence occurs. Working as a trainer, it's been easy to see in my life, as I'm expected to be influencing. This also flows through to every conversation you have. It's just that we don't tend to notice, and you need to start to notice. I want to suggest that you now start paying more attention to the conversations you have all the time and start to see the influencing factors that are there. By doing this, you will be even better prepared in your workplace and home life. There may be some times in your life when no matter what you do or say, the other person is not responding to you. Some people have built up a wall, and until we can understand that, we will not be able to influence that person. This is when we need to start building rapport. You see, communication is a loop. How do you get into the communication loop with another person? How can you respect and appreciate another person's model of the world while keeping your own integrity? Rapport, or empathy, is essential to establish an atmosphere of trust, confidence, and participation, within which people can respond freely. What do we do to gain rapport with people, and how do we create a relationship of trust and responsiveness? And how can we refine and extend this natural skill? To get practical, rather than a theoretical answer, turn the question around. How do you know when two people are in rapport? As you look around in restaurants, offices, any place where people meet and talk, how do you know which people have rapport and which do not? Communication seems to flow when two people are in rapport. Their bodies, as well as their words, match each other. What we say can create or destroy rapport, but remember that it's only 7% of the communication. Body language and tonality are more important. You may have noticed that people who are in rapport tend to mirror and match each other in posture, gesture, and eye contact. It's like a dance where participants respond and mirror each other's movements with movements of their own. They are engaged in a dance of mutual responsiveness. Their body language is complementary and they are in rapport. When people are not in rapport, their bodies reflect it. Whatever they are saying, their bodies will not be matching. They are not engaged in the dance, and you can see it immediately. Successful people create rapport, and rapport creates trust. You can create rapport with whoever you wish by consciously refining the natural rapport skills that you see and use every day. By matching and mirroring body language and tonality, you can very quickly gain rapport with almost anyone. Matching eye contact is an obvious rapport skill, and usually the only one that is consciously taught in English culture, which has a strong taboo against noticing body language consciously and responding to it. If you can match their body language sensitively and with respect, match arm movements by small hand movements, body movements by your head movements. This is gaining rapport. Matching breathing is a very powerful way of gaining rapport. You may already have observed that when two people are in deep rapport, they breathe in unison. Now, matching cannot be mimicry, which is noticeable, exaggerated, and indiscriminate copying of another person's movements. It's usually considered offensive. When people are like each other, they like each other. These are the basic elements of rapport, but don't believe me. Notice what happens when you mirror others. Then notice what happens when you stop. Notice what happens when two people are in rapport. Notice what happens what you do when you are in rapport. Start to be conscious of what you do naturally, so you can refine it and choose when to do it. You don't have to like the other person to create rapport. You're simply building a bridge to understand them better. Creating rapport is one choice, and you will not know its effectiveness or what results it has unless you try it. So rapport is the total context around the verbal message. If the meaning of the communication is the response it elicits, gaining rapport is the ability to elicit great responses. Now note, this is not something you do just to manipulate others. Building rapport is an extremely useful, natural human instinct we do every day. What I'm doing here is showing you how to fully use this natural talent we all have. Try matching people you talk to for a week and write about all the different body language signals you notice and how it impacted the conversation, and see what a difference it can make to your communication.